Welcome to Thinking Man Games, where we think about games, so you will too. I'm Tristan Edelman,
And I'm Gabe Gerwin.
and this week I wanted to talk about the whole Capcom. I say debacle is a good word, in terms of the reaction to the sales of Resident Evil 6 and DMC Devil May Cry,
hmm
which is not a good way to look at it, I don't think, from their perspective.
Yeah, and the thing I think, like, right off the bat is they're talking about how disappointing these sales are, but make no mistake, both of these games made money. It's
Hmm.
just they didn't make as much money as they had written into their books. And I think that's a very dangerous way of doing business, is to write in projected profits and to make decisions based on what you think those profits are going to be instead of playing it more conservatively. And I think you're going to see this even more with when Lost Planet.
Oof.
Yeah, because that game sold 30,000 copies in Japan and
But did
10,000
anyone
in the United
think it was
States.
gonna do well? Like
No, but that is
anywhere?
so pathetically bad that I don't think anyone imagined a game could do that bad from a
Yeah.
publisher as big as Capcom.
Well, and just for context, what were the figures that Resident Evil 6 sold like 5 million?
Yeah,
And they were looking for 7 million.
correct. And
And DMC, I'm not sure about.
DMC was initially they wanted it to sell 2, and then it sold about
1.15.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
So which is really sad to me because DMC is way better than Resident Evil 6 is. uh, and I think the problem is kind of that Capcom's not looking at the right places for how to fix this because they said they blamed it on excessive outsourcing. But it's not the outsourcing that's the problem. It's who they're outsourcing to that's the problem. Like, Ninja Theory did a really good job with DMC. And I'm sorry if you're listening and you don't agree with me, but it's a really, really good game. And it was what the series needed since it was getting really stagnant. Uh,
Excuse me.
And they had a good track record, which is important. Spark Unlimited did not. They had Call of Duty Finest Hour, which I think is a pretty bad Call of Duty game. And I reviewed that and I got torn apart for saying that. But and they also did Turning Point Fall of Liberty, which is one of the worst shooters ever made. And of course, they're the Western developer you totally want trying to revive your kind of long struggling series, Lost Planet, obviously.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and then on the flip side, though, they said Dragon's Dogma not overperformed, but it did really well,
Yeah,
past their expectations.
yeah,
I haven't played it, so I don't really know, but I guess it's a good thing. They said it. I think their exact words were, "It's been established as a standalone brand." I believe
yeah,
was the phrase.
yeah, which
Um,
means tons of DLC and all that sort of
yeah.
stuff. Yeah, and I thought that, like, I was sure that Dragon's Dogma, or excuse me, Deep Down was just going to be a next-gen Dragon's Dogma, mostly because of the initials and the fact that it looked very similar, but I guess that game's going to be online only, which I'm not really looking forward to.
Mm,
I wanted a good dungeon crawler, next-gen, so,
yeah.
and I'm not opposed to online-only games, like, I think they really can work, but recently there have been a few examples of online-only games that have disappointed me. That's one of them. The other one was Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, which is going to be online only.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
and I thought that would be like a cool tongue-in-cheek kind of story opportunity for them, but
Yeah.
whatever. They can lower the price, I guess, or not.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about what this means for, AAA games in general. I don't think it's as doom and gloom. Man, I'm all over the place.
Doom and or gloom.
Yeah, and or gloom as people are thinking it is. This is a sign of the end times for AAA games, which I don't agree with at all.
Yeah, I mean,
It-
they've taken up such a mainstream audience that I think it's just about lowering expectations slightly and not being stupid. Because if a company just realizes, hey, maybe this game isn't as big, like Square Enix and Tomb Raider, for example.
Yes, yeah,
They just
that's another
realize,
good.
like, maybe Tomb Raider is not that huge brand than it once was. Maybe we should lower our expectations so that we're still happy with how this does. Maybe we'll get some of that audience back with a sequel. You know, those are the sort of things that I think a few companies are doing right. Like, we talked last week how Rayman Origins didn't sell all that great because, like, it came out at the same time as Assassin's Creed, and
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
then it was also, kind of reviving a mediocre brand. But
Hmm.
they stuck with it, and they realized, this critical acclaim could give us some momentum going into the sequel, and it looks like that
It
is
could carry
happening.
over.
Yeah, and it looks like that is happening. And so I just wish other companies would realize that, right off the bat, maybe it's not going to sell all that well, but it could eventually.
The internet just went out randomly. I didn't hear any of that, so that's fun.
uh, okay. So, yeah.
Anyways, what was I gonna say though? Oh, well, with the Square Enix thing though, even more so, their expectations for Tomb Raider, they needed to lower that with Hitman Absolution 2, which was also another story that came out like that underperformed. It's like, yeah, it's Hitman, it's popular, but it's not a huge brand
Right.
even compared
Same.
to Tomb Raider.
Yeah, and then Sleeping Dogs, I don't know what they were thinking. Like, even
Oh
when that
god,
was
yeah.
when that was under the name True Crime, like no one ever cared about True
Yeah,
Crime.
no one.
And it's a good game, but like I think it sold about 1 million copies, and they said that was like disappointing for them. Like, what did you expect? It was a trouble project that you kind of revived, and it wasn't like a huge. Well, it had advertising, but it wasn't like as big as some of these other games.
Well, the main thing is, like you mentioned earlier, that it's not that they didn't profit off these games, Capcom at least. You know what I mean? It's just that their expectations were way too high.
And so they speculated in their books, and so they put that speculated number towards other projects and stuff, and now they're short because their projected numbers were too high.
It's not only a matter of expectations, but maybe also budgeting. I'm
Yeah.
sure these games cost a lot to make. I have no idea how AAA games, the budget goes to where.
Yeah.
But I'm almost certain that there could be a way that they could kind of cut down on budgets in general across the board.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that they could do, and this is a good example for Tomb Raider, is just don't tack on multiplayer and have an entire studio working on it. I played the multiplayer for Tomb Raider like 2 times, and it was like, okay, don't need to play that again. It was okay.
I think most people felt that way.
Yeah, and it's like, no one asked for that, in the words of Adam Jensen. But just, like, that's the very first thing. And there are some games that obviously multiplayer was added and it worked very well, like Assassin's Creed, for example. The multiplayer in that game kind of came out of nowhere and people were worried about it, but it's a lot of fun and it's different.
Last of Us as well. I know people enjoy that.
Yeah, that's one that I really didn't expect. But then there are other examples where it feels really added on. BioShock 2, Uncharted, those types of games just... they could probably make well, obviously both of those games were huge successes, but they could maybe even had more in the black if they had, cut those entirely. And obviously with BioShock Infinite they did.
Yeah. So I think there's just... I've seen so many reactions that, oh, this means that no other AAA game except for Call of Duty is going to exist. Call of Duty is an outlier. That's not a situation that applies to everyone.
Right.
But then you do see the mid-tier kind of publishers, THQ, publishers and developers shutting down in spite of, doing relatively well. And I do feel inclined to think that selling in general, even if budgeting was cut, expectations were cut down, everything, in general, games just have to do a lot better in order to profit.
Yeah.
Just the nature of the beast at this point.
And they do, and I think that's why the risk level is going down. But on the flip side, you're seeing very indie-friendly
Yes.
scenes for both consoles and obviously with Steam to, I think, a lesser extent. Because of the Greenlight program, I think people have some issues with it. But anyway, I think because of that, a lot of those games, people are getting good at making them, and you're gonna be able to see some games like this. Who is texting me? Oh, and that's gonna kind of take up that section, while other AAA games, big AAA games, can kind of still hold their weight. And it's going to be a smaller number, but it's not that big a deal. It's changing, but I think it's still going to be okay.
They're not mutually exclusive is the main thing. That you can have both. You can have big, huge experiences with tons of money behind them, and have tiny little, indie projects that turn out to be hugely successful. I mean, Minecraft. What were the numbers that came out recently? They were insane. The sales on that game.
I don't know. It was number 1 on Xbox Live for a while, though.
I think it was like 10 million or something. And so that game, I'm sure, didn't cost a ton to make. It was just a little indie project. Yep. And that's another outlier too. I mean, not every indie game is Minecraft, but it can be done, and it's not impossible.
Yeah. And I think it's weird because people want these AA kind of games to continue, but it's not just like they're going away. Like I said, I think a lot of indie developers and smaller companies they're able to make games like that. Like, look at Outlast, which is coming out, or Daylight, a company like Zombie Studios. They're still releasing, big fairly large games. They're just not, box retail releases for the most part. And then there's some positives too. A company like Deep Silver managed to do really, really well lately by kind of releasing these a little more under the radar titles on their own, and then obviously taking some of THQ's properties.
What were those under the radar ones you're talking about?
Like Metro. Metro was always kind of.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
well, that's another example of AA.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. And they announced that was a really big success for them. Like, it made its money back, like, immediately.
Because the budget wasn't huge. They made a point to point that out.
And part of that's because it was being made in a former Soviet satellite. But, yeah, and that game, like, it's great. I really like that game. Same thing with Payday 2. That made its money back before it even released, just from pre-orders.
Yeah, and those games don't look terrible if graphics are your thing, if you think, budget is necessarily...
Payday 2 looks pretty crappy, but...
I haven't really played that much. I've played very little.
Yeah.
But they don't look terrible, in my opinion.
No, I mean, it's a good... I mean, it plays well, it's just not a...
It's not a graphical powerhouse, and nor does it need to be. And, so... It can be done. Games can not cost millions of dollars and still... Speaking of AAA games that aren't going to make their money back just in pre-orders, what was the budget of GTA 5? Do you know?
$265 million.
Oh my God. They're going to make that back, though, and that's what's
immediately.
crazy.
I did the math. It's like about 4.5 million units sold to make their money back. And I guess that number included marketing, so they'll make that back within a week, I think.
Wow. Based on just the amount of people that aren't going to school on Tuesday, I would say that, they're making that.
And that game, and as far as marketing goes, I've seen more commercials for Grand Theft Auto 5 than any game ever.
I saw 2 within one commercial setting, or, sitting.
And it's like the same commercial all the time. It's got that creepy
exactly.
dude with the glasses and Michael's in the pool, but, man, I'm really, really excited for that game.
Me too. So I think that just about wraps it up. It's a little bit shorter episode in light of a huge episode last week, so just support publishers and developers, I guess, is the main thing.
When they deserve it.
Yeah, when they deserve it, exactly.
Alrighty, guys.
So see you later.